So did you guys ever read the short story, The Call of Cthulhu? Yeah, it's not bad. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and spoil the ending now, because it's like 100 years old, and, I mean, let's be honest, it takes an hour to read. If you haven't gotten around to it yet, were you really going to? Anyway, here's how it goes. A single brave Norwegian man slays the mighty Cthulhu by running into him with a small yacht. Yep. Dude bursts open like, quote, an exploding bladder, and goes back into the sea to sleep it off for a while. And I'm here to tell you with absolute certainty that taking him down that way is a hell of a lot easier than what this game expects from you. So if you're in the very, very small pool of people who have been around since this channel was just a couple videos old, you might have noticed that the gap between the last upload and this one is pretty fucking massive relative to the usual, but I swear I got good reason. This is the most confusing, ass-backwards game I've ever played. Like, I mean, my hardcore gamer ribbon stack, it doesn't look too bad, right? I mean, we've got all the Soulsborne, Akira games on there, Ninja Gaiden, the Crash Bandicoot remakes. I mean, I did Silent Hill 2 without even consulting a walkthrough, I swear on my fucking jorts. I've really put myself through the ringer. But just through the sheer, unrelenting lack of guidance or any effective conveyance, DCOTE here has stuck its flag atop the pile. But with that said, it's still somehow a pretty good time. Alright, so this is an old game with a lot of quirks, and on top of that, it didn't originally release on PC, so it's got some porting issues on top of that. So what you're gonna do is find the game on Steam. An underrated classic, they say. Sounds pretty good. You download, you boot it up, and yep, shit's broken. Okay, so we find a fan-made patch, maybe force a little VSync, and shit's still broken. Alright, try one more. You guessed it. Alright, new plan. You're gonna hit up GOG. They use their Polish witchcraft over there and they whipped it into shape for us. Thanks, GOG. Fuck you, Steam. You'll probably still run into the odd AI glitch and freeze here and there, but I was able to get through 2 playthroughs without any full crashes on this version. So let's get acquainted with our leading man, Jack Walters. He's smart, smooth talking.
William! For God's sake! Your friend is dead.
Handsome, relatable, probably half alien, and he's really fucking bad at handling firearms. A feature that might be seen by some as immersion breaking, but I actually really enjoy, is Jack's willingness to vocally acknowledge whatever it is you feel like looking at. You never seen a bookshelf before and its cold architecture is kind of creeping you out? Jack's got you covered. You're looking at a couple tanks of disembodied organs and for some reason you're wondering if they're gonna move.
His intestines have stopped moving. His brain stopped moving. His kidneys have stopped moving. His stomach stopped moving.
Jack's got you covered. You just watched a woman be murdered in cold blood and you're not sure what's up?
I'll be joining her if I don't get moving. She's dead.
Jack's got you covered. Yeah, in truth, there's not a ton to him, even as they unfold his story and ramp him up to an effective conclusion, but he still manages to be a productive centerpiece and set of eyes for the story of Innsmouth to unfold around. One thing we don't have to worry about with Jack as our stand-in is this issue of ludonarrative dissonance that the smart guy YouTubers are always harping on about. I won't waste your time waxing philosophical on the topic, other than to tell you that the writers clearly put at least a split second of thought into ensuring that the player's actions could almost always be completely justified by the background and nature of the protagonist. He's the classic dogged detective. He wants to do the moral thing and get to the bottom of every mystery afoot. So all our sneaking around and stealing shit, harassing people on the street for information, violence, or general shenanigans, they're all justified either by the nature of Jack or what he's forced to do because of how Innsmouth receives him. It's not a particularly unique strength of writing, but plenty of games botch this department, and the majority of them don't care, so I think it's fair to give kudos. If you were to stumble onto a forum or comment section where people are heaping praise on this game, the most common applause you'll see is for the early sequence where you're unarmed and investigating a boy's disappearance in town. And I can definitely see why. This atmosphere where you're uneasy and you know everything is definitely gonna go to shit, but you're just not sure exactly when, is nailed perfectly. Almost no one around town will do so much as give you directions, and you can hear from eavesdropping that anyone who does help you out will face serious consequences. Even the people who will talk to you speak in a lot of these fucking cryptic terms, so you still have to unravel things one crumb at a time by working your way into new locations, picking up the environmental storytelling, and reading diaries or town records. Plus, to top it off, you're getting trippy visions of some creature watching you from the rooftops, and you're slowly going insane from witnessing some of the hidden horrors around town. A little bit ago, I made a comment about the game's lack of effective conveyance being a problem, and I don't retract that statement for even half of a fucking second. However, in this early segment, from the time you bust into town to when you evade the first ambush in the hotel, it kinda works. There are some isolated instances of puzzles being goofy or irritating, but on the whole, there's something really engrossing about being dropped into a hostile open environment without any means of defense, and just told to figure it out. Like I said, I understand why this portion is so revered, but if I'm being honest, I was also kind of ecstatic when I walked into the police station and picked up a couple firearms. After a few hours of sneaking and running, constantly battling the game's unavoidable jank, AI bugouts, and the obviously dated stealth mechanics, weapons kind of felt like a necessary failsafe. As soon as I had my hands on the crowbar, pistol, and shotgun, it's hard to deny that a lot of the tension kind of flew right out the window. There are still methods put in place throughout this area where you find them to allow for a stealthy approach, which I completely commend them for, but at the time I didn't much see the point. At that point you should already have picked up enough ammo to clear the area and then some, so that's exactly what I did. The game was pretty swift about letting me know I'm not fucking Rambo, however. Soon afterward they have you trapped in the back of this truck, just being shot repeatedly and unable to effectively return fire, and the next area around the cannery is an absolute nightmare to try running and gunning through. Jack has some dreadfully shaky hands, and not to mention his occasionally blurred vision from either psychosis or injury. And on top of that, these hitboxes would make fucking Dark Souls 2 cringe. So you might be looking at the evidence here and going, oh okay, so this isn't a game where you're supposed to big iron everything you see. Good. And theoretically I would agree, except sometimes that's exactly what the game wants from you. There are wave sections in this thing for God knows what reason. So despite my initial joy at discovering the thrill of murder, these actually ended up being the weakest sections of the game. Some segments are still reminiscent of the earlier unarmed stealth sections, where it's in your best interest to slink around and wait to progress, maybe whack an occultist or two if they get in the way. The general AI also isn't programmed to be all that responsive to noises or gunfire, so stealth isn't even that difficult if the path through is made somewhat clear to the player. It makes for an experience that kinda seems to be lacking confidence. Like they didn't think that the slow burn style of the early sections could hold your attention, so they had to mix in a bunch of combat, but the combat sections either feel almost unnecessary or like you're about to have a fucking conniption. When we talk about pacing in a video game context, there are two aspects we have to consider compared to the more straightforward analysis we can do of a movie or book. There's the traditional storytelling pacing, when the different story beats come to fruition, how they develop, and how much time is allotted to them. Then, in most games anyway, we have to consider the pacing of gameplay implementation. So generally a game's challenge should be on an upward trend for its entire duration, while the player becomes more and more confident with what the gameplay loop asks of them, and maybe inherent some new items or abilities to help them meet the greater challenge. But that's kinda out the fucking window here, I gotta be honest. So you do, in fact, acquire better armaments as the game progresses, but combat encounters are not slowly complexified over the course of the game to spur critical thinking from the player. Stealth environments are pretty identical wall to wall, and the puzzles are, some of them are satisfying to crack, but most of them are poorly conveyed trial and error nonsense that just inspire raw anger upon completion. Okay, wait. So, I needed to sequentially climb up all these ladders one at a time and fucking headbutt the grating to draw the bad guys away. See, who made this, right? Who would even have that instinct? Anyway, no one really wants to watch a video of me screaming for an hour, so I'll make a long story short. The gameplay is not terribly strong, even for the time period. Alright, so it's time to admit that the fundamental premise of this video, i.e. killing Cthulhu, is false. Because this game, for anyone who doesn't know, is actually about taking down Dagon and his esoteric order. It's a somewhat more exciting adaptation of not Call of Cthulhu, but rather The Shadow over Innsmouth. Alright, and I don't feel bad about this because it wasn't even me that did it, alright? It was the fucking game itself. It clickbaited all of us. I guess they figured bitch-ass Dagon didn't have the same name recognition, so they had to pull in Squidboy. Anyway, I feel better having that out in the open. The story and world here made for a pretty impressive little balancing act. It's got atmosphere that keeps the player on their toes. It's got a well-timed drip feed of information that keeps us invested in investigating. And it even gets away with a few bombastic action sequences that, in my opinion anyway, don't disrupt the atmosphere or pacing of the story outside of being fucking nightmares to play through. In typical Lovecraftian fashion, the story of Innsmouth can pass you right by if you don't put in the work to pick up on hints and do your reading. Honestly, I can't imagine how incredibly confused about shit someone might be at the end of this game if they'd never bothered to check Jack's journal. You'll probably still be a little confused anyway, but you'll have enough info that it all feels satisfying. The story undoubtedly picks up some serious steam as it trucks along though, so if you're a big fan of the more understated horror in the early game, just know it's not gonna quite stay that way. And likewise, if you're less into wandering around town getting stared at by inbreds and you just want to fight sea monsters and see aliens and shit, you'll have your time in the sun too. And I enjoyed the variety. You probably noticed that it kind of seems like I'm dancing around spoilers here, right? Not a lot of story specifics outside of the obvious, and all footage from like the first third of the game. So I apologize if you're not someone who cares about that stuff and you wanted more depth. I just try to be mindful. Anyway, I think we'll start wrapping up here. I was planning to do a section just covering a lot of the jank and technical problems you could expect, but I didn't think you guys would really get much out of that. Just know it's a busted ass game. It was jank as fuck way back at release, and the porting and aging hasn't been great to it, even with the handiwork of the saints over at GOG. My advice would be to go in expecting to dislike a lot of the gameplay, and being there for the atmosphere and story, and then if you end up actually enjoying the act of playing it, then it'll be a nice surprise. Alright, thank you guys for sticking around. If you have any feedback or suggestions for future content, don't hesitate to let me know in the comments, and I'll talk to you later. Kisses.